All right, so let me invite James and Esther back on screen for the Q&A segment. Yeah, so thanks a lot, both of you, for sharing in detail about all of these important points of the VCP and for so openly discussing all of the concerns or adaptations that we can do. Right, so the first question I wanted to ask James actually is you were sharing that implementation and buy-in was one of the challenges that you were facing, right? So can you share about what are some of the, like, go further into elaboration about like what are some of the other challenges that you or you think SSAs will face when implementing a VCP?
Well, I think definitely buy-in is the most major one, because as with, I think for me, we anticipated because over the last 2 years, right, there have been a lot of changes, a lot of advisories, a lot of guidelines, as a result, I think there could be a bit of fatigue, right? So when something comes, right, people will just say, okay, so here's another set of guidelines, will it change again, those kind of things. So I would say that's the most major one. I think other than that, the other challenge is really to make sure that the VCP will really work. It will really work and really address ground needs. So I really see this too as I can't think of any for now, but I really think that in terms of that is the people's buy-in, the relevance of the guide. And I think lastly is the communication, because I mean, communication is very linked to buy-in. It's not just the staff, but even the volunteers also. I had this very interesting conversation with my volunteer, and he, one of the major things that I thought of doing is to, okay, send out a note. Okay, one thing is that we need to check all our volunteers' vaccination status, right? So we had this conversation. Then, okay, naturally I'll think, okay, send a note out, ask people who is vaccinated, who is not vaccinated, you receive your booster already, all those kind of things. And then my volunteer actually challenged me, he says that, do you really want to do that? Because there's going to be a lot of paperwork, you're going to be a lot of tracking, and those kind of things. So I mean, I'm glad that there's this thing, he's helping me think through, and process. And then so we were thinking about how we will handle this, because to be very frank, you can do that, but not 100% of the volunteers are going to respond. And then you end up with a situation whereby if a person comes, then you've got to go and check through the system again. This person has it actually declared already, not declared, send the person back home. I think it's going to cost a lot. So I think a lot of things is that we need to actually, and people will be upset. So I think in communicating, right, we need to actually be very clear about the spirit behind it, and then we need to communicate that spirit, whether it's to staff or to volunteers. And of course, we try to think about how to actually make things easy for them, So my simple idea of sending out a declarations form to ask everybody to declare, I didn't even think will actually cause so much problems down the road. So I think before we communicate, we also think very carefully also the operationalization. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot, James. I wanted to also actually ask, there was another question on how long did you take to complete your VCP proposal, Chinese version?
Okay, to be very frank, I started working on the VCP in October, about mid-October with my volunteer, and I had to actually submit it in January of 2022. So it took me about 1.5 months. Yeah, 1.5 months to the basic foundational one. All right. I mean, of course, we had a lot of to and fro with volunteers. We talked to management, we talked to key people. And then by the time we feel that, okay, this is really quite, at this point in time, it seems robust enough, but we make it a point that this is not cast in stone. All right. So, the things that we put it up for approval, after 1.5 months. Yeah. So I think with the things that we did, including referring to the VCP guide and talking to my volunteer, we're able to cut short to about 1.5 months. Yeah.
wow, that's a pretty ambitious timeline. I think that for anyone else who wants to, I think can also just try it. Don't beat yourself up if it's not like 1.5 months, okay? And this one's like
Yeah.
×2 speed or what?
1.5 months to get the basic foundation out first. I think let's work towards that first, and you know, really get and if you can get help from volunteers, you know, that would be great. Yeah, because you have that resource, you have access to the resource. You are a volunteer management practitioner.
Right. Thanks for that.
Maybe another reference point we can take is in our previous engagement session, right? We had Singapore Children's Society, and for them, I guess they were guided through a consultancy process. So for them, it took around like 6 months. But at the end of the day, because it's very dependent on the number of programs that are involved, very dependent on the number of stakeholders involved, right? So I think one of the common questions is also, you know, do I need to have multiple frameworks for, let's say, different services or different programs, right? Or what's the difference? Yeah, let's say you are a single service kind of agency and multi-service agency. What we have realized as we work with the 5 different agencies is that it's not a number of, you know, different frameworks that you have, because I think we see that it's the same thought process, the whole principle is there. But I guess that the key change or key difference is in terms of the number of stakeholders that you have to engage. So naturally, with, you know, with more programs, it's not really gets more complex, but you need to engage more stakeholders, right? So I think I see a lot of volunteer centers with us, and yeah, one of the volunteer centers who was doing the VCP also, I think that was something that they had to really just understand a little bit more as to how they can engage their partners a bit more efficiently and also make it easier for them. Another agency that was doing the VCP, so the VM also understand that, you know, to keep disturbing the colleagues, they also feel paiseh, right? But really, like what James mentioned, like it's really as a VM, we can try our best to do our due diligence and make it as easy for our VMs as possible. So maybe it's not just about, you know, sending them the templates and asking them to fill it out, right? Because they don't know where it comes from, but digesting it yourself first. And then if possible, right, I mean, maybe just talking it through, right? A lot of times it's also that chance to build a rapport with the different stakeholders, which I think is one of the critical success factors that I see in James, because he have really put in a lot of effort in terms of building rapport across the different services. And that's why perhaps, you know, in terms of timing, it could be faster. But yeah, maybe not to stress all of us in terms of timing, but yeah, it's a good gauge as to, you know, the range from maybe 2 months to 6 months. At the end of the day, it's just starting with something comfortable for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe I think it's a good point to actually note. I mean, as in relatively, like I say, Shine, we are a smaller team of 90, you know, and, you know, the programs are more homogeneous because it's children and youth, right? I would guess that if you work with, if it's a multi-service, you have more stakeholders, you have more things to consider, right? And different kind of volunteer engagement, you'll take longer. I think the main thing about it is not to rush through it, because you don't want to, at the end of the day, have a guide. In the end, you know, it's produced in the shortest time, but, you know, it really, and I think people will lose confidence in that, you know, but I think like what Esther mentioned, take time to really digest, get to know the needs, right? As a volunteer manager, you should know very well what your volunteers are doing and how they're being engaged. You should have some of these which should help in the development, but different organizations will take different, from 1.5 months to 6 months to even possibly a year for very complex cases, I guess, where you want to have a very robust VCP. Yeah. So yeah, I think we can take it from that angle to develop something that really works and that really helps you to stay in business, you know, and providing your service for your service.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for both Esther and James chiming in on this. There was actually a question on funding during our pre-event survey. Okay, so whether there'll be funding to help support the implementation or the creation of the VCP, and yeah, so wanted to check with Esther whether or not what's your thoughts on this?
Maybe I'll just get James to chime in first, right? Whether like would funding can make it easier for you?
Yes, of course. I think with funding, it's always easier, you know. And, you know, I think funding is not only about funding. I think it's access to the funding so that we have access to, you know, people who with the relevant subject matter expertise to actually come into work with us. I mean, to be very fair, I mean, even when I'm talking to like my volunteer, right, who used to be a former management consultant, he can offer certain things, okay, but I guess it's more in the commercial world, right? But the thing about it that is very helpful is that he actually can bring in certain perspectives that I would never have thought of. So in the same way, I think some of these consultants that come in, right, all thought through. Like for example, today, right, what I'm sharing with you, the journey, I think this particular journey, they've been on it many times. So they kind of know like what are the different checkpoints, and they can give you all these signposts. So I think definitely it would have been less nerve-wracking for me with funding and also funding support. Yeah.
Thanks, James. So I think good news. I mean, there has always been multiple pots of funding available. I mean, even for volunteer management. And I'm not sure whether you guys are also familiar with the new Community Capability Trust, right? The CCT fund that has just opened up. There is an open pot where basically majority of the work that we do, there's even a whole key pillar on volunteer management. So that is something that you can consider. But I think another reason why I wanted to ask James is also because many times when we think about funding, we think about this like, quite a big project where, we have to get approvals and stuff like that. But also the challenge us to think about, alternative solutions like what James did, maybe in terms of skills-based volunteerism, right? Because at the end of the day, we don't want to frighten us off with the most holistic plan to start off first, but really just leveraging on the experience that we have with COVID, right? Laying down some of the critical, I mean, just even listing out one or two of your essential services or critical programs, and then just walking through the whole process. And you realize that actually, it's already things that you may have already considered, maybe some new points that you realize, actually I could have mitigated this a little bit more, right? And then after you do that, then even as they say you get a consultant or, you get external support, you are more aware of how things are and you have a bit more control. And because at the end of the day, the consultant can walk you through the process, but in terms of engaging your staff and all, that would still ultimately be based on the rapport that you have with your colleagues. So yes, definitely funding is available, but don't just let that, think that, I need to get funding to do this because it's but actually it is, that's why we developed the guide for you guys, so that hopefully, depending on the need that we have, we can tier it based on, where we are in terms of readiness and also availability of funds.
Yeah, I think thanks, Esther, for sharing that. I think really thinking through it is very important. Yeah, because if you don't think through it before, you have to think through it during the consultancy. They will definitely ask you all these questions. So might as well think through it. We got that experience even from consultancy, for identifying, let's say, our volunteer management system, about that, right? I mean, you don't think about it when the consultants come in, they're going to ask you the questions about it. So yeah, so it's good to think also so that, when the time comes, you know what you want and how it's supposed to look like. Yeah.
Really agree with that, because sometimes the answer is not just external, but the answer is actually internal as well, because ultimately you're really the expert of your own program, volunteer management processes, as well as your own organization's offerings. So ultimately the answer will have to be a combination of both getting help from external and your own internal stakeholders, especially your colleagues, your senior management and stuff like that. Yeah. Okay, that's great. So I think there was also another question which I think we have already discussed throughout this Q&A, which was about how to utilize limited volunteer management resources when implementing VCP. So what I've heard from James is already including his own colleagues from the PCS team, which includes colleagues from different services, as well as the volunteers, as well as for some of the agencies, maybe a consultancy that may potentially be helpful. All right, so actually at this juncture, I just wanted to invite both James and Esther to share one key takeaway or words of encouragement for our audience, actually, because everybody is at different stages, right, and interested in different aspects. Yeah.
Okay.
Can we start with Esther?
Yeah, maybe to take this chance to also just address one last question, which is the key takeaway, right? In terms of is it still relevant, right? Since now we are post crisis, is this a good time to still think about it? How relevant is it going to be? But really the answer is now is really the best time. Really because, as what James mentioned, the spirit behind VCP, right, is about providing assurance, right, for our volunteers, for our staff, and like most importantly, also our service users. So with that in mind, we hope that, you know, we have tried a little bit better to make it more accessible for you guys in terms of thinking through the process. And as what James mentioned also, don't be afraid to start small. And now you are aware of so many other people who are also doing it. So it is the best time to also ask around, right? Because previously, maybe I think like what James mentioned, it was very new to many people. Many people may not even have known what it's about. So you ask them, you know, you don't really know how to get more support. But now there are a lot, right? As we mentioned, more than 50, actually in our last session, more than 100 over agencies have indicated, right, that they are really likely, they are in the plans of developing their own VCP. So we are definitely not in this alone. So let us know anytime that you would like to ask any questions or, you know, connect us with anybody. We'll be happy to see how we can support. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, as for me, thanks Jing-Yi for asking Esther first, because I was still thinking. So it gave me some time to really process through. So because I mean, there are so many things that I've learned from the whole process. But I think one major takeaway for me is I find actually how this whole process can also be very powerful in positioning the volunteer program in the right direction, right? Because for the longest time, I've always wanted people to see the potential of the volunteer program. I wanted to see the potential of the volunteer program to be able to resource the organization, you know, not to have more work, you know, but in a way to impact more, right? And to have access to skills that otherwise our staff would not have. And I think with the VCP, right, it was going to this direction because it was showing that we are so serious enough that we want to make sure in the event of a crisis, volunteer support can still continue, right? Volunteer support, critical volunteer support can still continue so that you know, our people, our frontliners, you know, can continue to do the work they do. They are supported well, and our service users are also supported. So I think the whole VCP is not just an exercise to do that, you know, just because we need to come up with something, but in terms of positioning the volunteer program, it is also a very powerful strategy, you know, and showing people that we are really serious about this. Yeah.
I really appreciate that point. It's a very good insight actually, because I mean previously from my VM experience also, sometimes people only think of volunteer management when they need the support, right? But we also want to be proactive about how volunteers really can make an impact in the agency, and there's really volunteers who are ready and available. So why not, let's just put our come together and partner each other throughout the whole agency to make this work. So I think that's great. Thank you so much both for your affirmations and encouragement for everybody today.